Good morning, family. I just have really appreciated yesterday and all of you who put in the work to make yesterday go off as well as it did. Um, so this morning I kind of figured we'd probably have a few more people than normal, which it looks like I was a little bit right. Um, I wanted to talk about love primarily. Uh, Today. I'm gone next week, and Dave is stealing one of my Bible studies for the foreseeable future. Um, so I kind of wanted to leave it on this note. As I told you guys before, I think that this is kind of one of those topics we need to visit and visit and visit and revisit because it's so important. Um, but before I get started this morning, I want to acknowledge Brandon. Thank you so much for stepping up. That was a difficult passage for anybody. We can blame Mr. Zacharias for that. Today I want to get started in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If you're here for Bible study, we studied through 1 John chapter 3, verse 11 through the rest of the chapter. And he talks about the importance of the love that we have for one another and how that comes from the example that Christ loved us. And in 1 Corinthians 13, it goes even further to tell us that without this love, nothing else really has any meaning at all. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I have gained nothing. That's pretty powerful right there, isn't it? Like, we normally think of faith as being the most important thing in our lives, right? Because it is through faith that we are saved, right? And yet, in 1 Corinthians, we read that without love, faith has no meaning for us. God, from the very beginning, as we talked about last week, God from the very beginning existed in a state of relationship to himself and to the rest of creation later on. In fact, the entire story of human history, right? The entire story of the Old Testament is a story of man's relationship with God. You see, the thing we call religion is really just a fancy word for the relationship between us and God. Better to call it love. It is through that love that we experience God's nature, that we begin to reflect God's nature. It is through that love that others see God's nature. It is love that gives us all of the examples and all of the opportunities that are brought to us. Verse 4, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoings, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Yeah, I think that we don't spend enough time, or at least a lot of us don't spend enough time meditating on this passage. There is a lot of us that would insist that we are doing some of these things out of love, and yet in 1 Corinthians we're reading that love doesn't do these things. How often have I demanded that things be done the way I want them done? How often have I been impatient with the people around me? How often have I boasted about the accomplishments I've had? How many times have I been rude to people? How many things am I resentful over? And yet, all of these things, I brag about how loving I am, and yet I can go down this list, and there's a great deal of them that I can say apply to my character. Does that mean that love is absent? I've come to the conclusion that what I believe to be love is an immature view of it. What I have always believed about love is such a limited idea of what God is really telling us. If you take 1 John chapter 3 and 1 Corinthians 13 together, what we're really being told by the scriptures is that love is absolute. There is nothing outside of it that matters, and it is all encompassing. There is no part of ourselves that we get to segment off and keep separate from the effects of love. There is no part of our lives that we get to segment off and say that love does not get to define or direct this part of my life. Now, I don't believe that very many people are guilty of suggesting that they want somebody to do horrible, evil things, right? When it says that love does not rejoice at wrongdoings, I don't think that's what it's talking about. But I do think that sometimes we can hope for people to mess up, right? To make a mistake. I got a friend named, I'm going to name him because I don't care if he's embarrassed or not. I got a friend named Chafin, right? And for those of you who think I'm arrogant, you should meet this guy. He'll be your best friend. And I have found myself more than once saying, it'd be really nice for him to just have a nice slice of humble pie. It'd be really nice to see him eat crow today. But at the end of the day, I don't ever want him to mess up. He's one of my best friends. I've never wanted anything bad to happen to him. I don't want him to make mistakes. I want him to do what's right. And that's how we're supposed to view each and every one of us. That's how you love. It's so amazing to me how we segment off love and we act like there's these different layers of it. Right? That there's different levels of love. Like somehow the fact that I wish wrongful things on you doesn't necessarily mean I don't love you. It means I love you less than this person. But do you know that that's what hate means? To love somebody less. If I love you less than the other people in my life, then I hate you. We often look at hate like it's a complete rejection or resentment of somebody, but that's not really what that word means. So can we honestly say that we don't hate anybody? I don't know that I can. And that bothers me. It bothers me a great deal. Because 1 Corinthians chapter 13 tells me that if that's the case, if I've fallen guilty of having hatred in my heart, then nothing I do matters. It doesn't matter how many times I proclaim the good news to people. It doesn't matter how many acts of service I have. It doesn't matter how hard I work to serve others in my community. It doesn't matter how hard I work to lead my family to the paths of righteousness. It all means nothing if I have hatred in my heart. Verse 8, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly lit, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abides, these three. But the greatest of these is love. I think what we're being shown here is an image of what heaven looks like. That is that perfect that is to come. You see, when the perfect comes, when we are in heaven, when we have been redeemed and brought to our Savior, there will be no reason for prophecies. If you've not done a study on prophecy and what it is, prophecy is much more than telling the future like we're seeing in a lot of Revelation. Prophecy is speaking on behalf of God. There's no reason to speak on behalf of God when we're in His presence, is there? There'll be no reason to speak in tongues. We'll all be rejoicing, the same person speaking in the same tongue. Knowledge passes away because there's no reason to know anything more than what we're in the presence of. It says, even though all of these things pass away, when we are in heaven, when we are before the throne of God, there is one thing that we have here on earth that will remain, and that's love. Do you not see that the author of Corinthians is telling us that when we have love for one another, we actually experience the only part of heaven that we get to experience in life? Who are we to reject somebody of that? Or to withhold it from somebody? Love is a difficult thing because it calls us to submit and serve someone else. It calls us to place their importance above our own. There are certain people that are really easy to love. It becomes a natural thing, right? There are few decisions I make in a day without my household being in my mind. My wife, my child, every decision I make, I think about them. Is this going to affect them? Is it going to affect them poorly? Is it going to benefit them? And there are other people that are a little bit more difficult. And they might be difficult to us because of distance or some kind of gap, whether it be generational or geographical or cultural. There's all kinds of barriers that can get between us as people when we allow them. I think that's why the story of Jesus Christ talking to the woman at the well is so important. We often look at that and we get a lot of lessons from that, but I think one of the big lessons is that Jesus shows us that love crosses all of those barriers. There is nothing that can stand in front of something that is eternal. And love is the only thing that we get to experience this side of heaven that is eternal, that we get to keep with us when we go. So why not? Why not dedicate ourselves to storing it up? Why not dedicate ourselves to gaining more of it? Why not dedicate ourselves to sharing more of it? It is, after all, the only thing we get to take with us. It can be difficult. It's difficult to keep it in our minds sometimes. It's difficult for us to remember that it is the single greatest thing God graces us with. It colors everything. It gives meaning to everything. Even the sacrifice of Jesus only has meaning because of the love that motivated him to the cross. Your salvation is made possible because of God's love for you. Proclaiming the gospel news to others only works when we have love for them. So today I hope that you accept the challenge to view that as a top priority in your life, the one thing that we are to pursue above all else, an increase in love. Love for God and love for our fellow man. That it be allowed to color every decision you make. That it be allowed to motivate your every deed, your every action. How many of us wish to be superheroes? How many of us think it would be nice to be able to pray and a whole mountain to throw itself in the ocean? And yet we're told how much better it is to love one another. But your prayers mean nothing if love does not motivate them. And oftentimes love is the answer to the very prayers you're asking for. So seek love. As much as you seek wisdom, as much as you seek answers, more than you seek power or persuasion or influence, more than you seek a position, more than you seek success or victory, seek love. Through seeking love, we seek eternity together. This morning, we ask that you come forward. We ask that you come forward every morning that we gather because of our love for each and every one of you. It is a call to the altar, as some have called it. It is a call to confession, a call to repentance. It's a call to reconciliation. There's a great many people in here, and each of you have a great many needs, and we ask that you bring those needs forward. Make them known so that we can help you see them met as we stand and sing.